Joining me now is former Lieutenant Governor and columnist for the New York Post, Betsy McCoy, Coleman Hughes, author of The End of Race Politics, Associate Professor of History at Johns Hopkins University, Leah Wright Rigueur, and Dante Mills is back with us. Leah, what do you make of this second bite at the apple by Justice Alito about explaining how this insurrectionist symbol ended up outside of his house?
So, I don't buy it. I'm sure the lawyers on the on the panel will tell me that I have to buy it, that it's, it's a good legal strategy.
You don't have to buy anything.
A good legal strategy, it's a good defense. But, I'm incredibly disturbed by the idea that in response to getting into an argument, a very nasty argument with a neighbor, that the response is to put up an insurrectionist flag, right, or to support an insurrectionist movement. And so I think that, part of what Alito is trying to do is to find a plausible explanation that works. The point that I think is important here is that it actually doesn't matter what explanation he comes up with, because there is no mechanism for holding anyone on the Supreme Court accountable other than the mechanisms, the actual guardrails of the other Supreme Court justices. So they have a code of ethics that they instituted in 2023, but it actually doesn't mean anything besides they all sign on to it and they say, we will try and be ethical in our jobs. So, this is, I think, part of the court of public opinion and trying to make an explanation, but it's not actually necessary for Alito to do it.
It may not be in the letter of the law, so to speak, when it comes to ethics, but should there not be just standards of basic conduct that say, we are going to try to stay as far away from partisan politics while I am sitting on this court? And by we, I mean me and my immediate family.
Sure, it's a bad judgment call by Mrs. Alito, to be sure. But we don't actually and shouldn't have a standard that says your spouse can't have political beliefs and that compromises.
Yeah, but how are we to know that it's actually his spouse? That's his word. It's flying outside of his home where he lives.
Well, he says it's his spouse. I don't have any information to the contrary. Right?
That's right. And let's look at the setting of this, because ever since the Dobbs decision regarding abortion, the neighborhood surrounding Justice Alito's house, Justice Alito wrote the majority decision in that case, has been swarming with neighbors who are very angry and outside protesters as well. And it culminated one day in this very angry argument when some of the neighbors called Mrs. Alito the C word. And according to the justice, Mrs. Alito went home and flew the flag upside down, which is a symbol that would cause many people concern. But let's put this in perspective. There is so much push from the left to convince Americans that the court is in Donald Trump's pocket. But if you look at the facts, 4 cases have been decided by this court regarding Donald Trump, 4 already. He lost 3 of them. He lost the 2 cases in 2020. Trump versus Mazar and Trump versus Vance, right? In 2021, he lost the Pennsylvania election case about how votes were counted in Pennsylvania during the presidential election. He's only won 1 case, the Colorado ballot case, decided this March, and that was decided unanimously. Even the far left jurists on that court decided that it was farcical to apply the 14th Amendment.
It's not just about the court generally.
So it is not in
It's not just
Trump's
about
pocket.
the court generally. I mean, obviously,
the
court is not Alito alone. There are 9 justices. But I mean, look, it's not just Dobbs either. It wasn't just about policy or anything like that. Apparently, according to Alito, this was about Trump. And the court is now dealing with 2 cases that have to do with Donald Trump. And maybe it's enough for you to take Alito's word for it, but a lot of Americans are going to say, he's trying to put this on his wife, and we have no idea if that is the case.
Absolutely. And perception is what we want to be clear here. We want to look at our Supreme Court justices who make these important decisions that impact our laws and how they're interpreted, and know that they're going to be fair, or at least believe that. If you're a Supreme Court justice and then you're saying in retaliation, the first thing that happened was you put a flag upside down to support stopping the steal. Well, it happened in your home. Then how can anyone in the nation look at you and believe you're going to be fair in anything that involves Donald Trump? That's what we want to avoid, the perception of this. And that's what he allowed to happen.
When I grew up, my mom loved Karl Marx and my dad loved Ayn Rand. could not be further different. It's not so abnormal in couples to not agree on every last.
No, but you
job
guys aren't on the
Kind of
Supreme
sexist.
Court,
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
Impute the motives or ideas of one.
Well, I mean,
to one's
look,
mate.
when it
It's
came-
sexist. It's 19th century.
I actually, I mean,
it's so backwards.
listen, I tend to agree with you. When it came to Hillary Clinton, her views were reflective of Bill Clinton's views. Michelle Obama's views were reflective of Barack Obama's views. It's about public perception in part, and those are not,
private,
and those are politicians. Those are not Supreme Court justices.
That's right. And
That's 'cause they
Supreme
had
Court
good judgment
justices
as
are
spouses.
entitled to political views, but when they decide a case, they are supposed to decide what is the law of the land. A Supreme Court justice can have private political views, just like a heart surgeon can have private political views and still do a perfect heart operation on you. That the role of the justice is to decide what the law is.
Well,
and
we
You're
what is the
overlooking the
highest
fact
law
that
of the
they're a
land.
pillar. They're a pillar in the legal community. These are the top justices
Right.
in the land.
That's
you
right.
have to handle yourself that way. And yes, it may be that his wife put it up, but if that happens in your household, we don't know that that's the case or not. We're going to look at your opinions and believe that they are swayed because of your political beliefs. And as a Supreme Court Justice of the United States, you should not allow that to happen.
There's
flag is
also
not
the,
still
there's,
flying.
but there's also the belief that the Supreme Court justices have that they present to the public that they are objective, right? So Clarence Thomas has gone on record as saying, no, I am apolitical. I am not. I am an objective person. His personal life is very different. And in a moment where only 40% of Americans have faith in the Supreme Court, 53% do not believe the Supreme Court to actually be an ethical institution, I do think that the court is very concerned about how it looks and how it is perceived. This does not help that argument, even as we know that the justices are inherently political. They were picked for political reasons. And it's not just right justices, it's not just left justices. All justices are picked as a political project.
Let's point out that although about half the nation doesn't have confidence in the court is much higher in public opinion than the Congress or the White
That's a
House
very
or
low
many
bar.
other
That is an
institutions. That's right.
extremely
Well, you also
low
have
bar.
Trump
When you look
saying
at
that
this
a judge-
Constitution, the Supreme Court has held up far better than the other
But
branches
look,
of
I mean,
government.
Coleman, the politics of the court right now are what they are, but the institution does need credibility. And it does seem like we are straying further and further from a world in which they really try to stay away from partisan politics. I mean, even Clarence Thomas, when I covered the Trump administration, he would come to the White House to have lunch with Mike Pence almost annually. Shouldn't there be just on principle, a principle that they just stay away from the politicians while they are sitting in those chairs?
Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more about that. My disagreement is the assumption that he can control his spouse. I think it's a bit regressive, right? We all understand
Look,
nowadays that
I mean,
spouses can be independent
I'm
of
a
one another.
journalist and would never let my spouse put a political sign outside of
that's 'cause
our home.
you have a very
so
wise. You're
my
lucky to have a very
standard
wise
should not be
spouse.
higher than the
You're-
Supreme Court justice's
You chose
standard,
very
don't you
well,
think?
and you have a wise spouse. But that does not mean that he could have controlled what she did. We can't assume.
But we're in a
that.
And I
situation
don't
where
want
Trump.
to take her First Amendment right,
That's right.
away. She was outraged and
if he
offended,
left that
and she
sign up-
used a symbolic way of talking to her neighbors and
if he had
repudiating
left
them.
if he had left it up, if it was up there today,
That
you
would be
okay with
disturbing.
it?
No.
That'd be
Why,
different.
why would
What's
it be
the difference?
disturbing
Because
for one
that
day
would,
or a week or
that
or
would
a year?
signify a long-term acquiescence, whereas he came home and found the flag up.
But he
That's
left
what
it up for
described.
days. He left it up for
Well, they
days.
probably had to work it out.
Okay.
You know, maybe he
Retaliation
did the
is
dishes
part of the
4 nights
problem.
in a row.
That's
It's also it is
'Cause you
also
can't just
out of
get
the
your way in a
norm of
marriage.
what justices have traditionally done. Sandra Day O'Connor, right, was a state senator from Arizona. Her husband ran for governor, and she said, "I will recuse myself in anything that has to do with what my husband believes because I don't want it to be a reflection on the court." Right? Why can't Alito do
We
the
got to
same?
hold that standard.
Gotta hold
We
the
have to
bar.
hold the
Yeah, those choices
I know
can,
the left
in
is pushing
fact,
very
be
hard for
made.
these recusals. They want to get rid of Clarence Thomas.
Well, Trump
and
wanted his
Alito.
judge recused because of
But
what his daughter
these
did.
are these Trump cases. The court has
That's a
already
fair
demonstrated
point, Betsy.
its
Right.
neutrality regarding
Betsy.
Donald Trump.
Lieutenant Governor, I mean, he makes an important point. The standard on the right, according to Trump, is the judge in New York should recuse because his daughter, who is a grown adult, who doesn't live in his house anymore, has a job in partisan politics. Is that fair?
I don't know about his daughter.
This is a
You know,
gotcha moment. We just had a gotcha moment.
You know, I'm not sure
It's
about.
not
I
a
haven't
gotcha
said
moment,
anything
it's
about Judge
just-
Meacham because I don't know.
But that's the accusation
Yes,
that people are
but
making against
I
him.
don't think in this
You don't
day
think
and
it's a
age.
good accusation?
I don't. I'm just. But
Right,
I'm.
so
A
the-
man
the
should be held
consistent thing is
responsible
that-
for his wife's
But
views.
his daughter is doesn't live in his home. Doesn't
Much more removed
You know, is
from
way
him.
more removed than his wife who lives in his house.
I don't think you can assume a husband and a wife agree. In fact, quite often the
I'm not
opposite's the
assuming that they
case.
agree. I'm just asking
Yes.
about the propriety of leaving that symbol outside
It's
of the home.
improper by her because she ought to
Yes.
know that she shouldn't do, as the spouse of a Supreme Court justice, you should do the wise thing in all cases. But let's not pretend that every one of these Supreme Court justices' spouses has their own opinions that they privately talk about at home. We all know that's the
Of course
case.
they do.
Most of them are just wise enough to never signal that to the public.
Well, we'll see.
You know, you ought to be a marriage counselor. You're really good at this.
All right, this is a lesson in working our differences out. Everyone, thank you very much.